All right, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We can do a little better than that. Come on. Good morning.
Good morning.
There we go. I know it's early, but we're having fun. All right, so good morning, everybody. My name is John Carroll. I'm the Director of Public and Government Affairs for Middlesex County, New Jersey. And, first and foremost, just want to thank everybody for being here. Obviously, the topic of, today's session is Vision Zero, right? And want to acknowledge the fact that when we look across the audience from our municipalities today, we have representatives, not just mayors, business administrators, chiefs of staff at the policy level. We have the majority of municipal engineers and planners here, and we also have, from a law enforcement perspective, the majority of the municipalities represented by chiefs of police, traffic enforcement, and so on. And when you think about Vision Zero, when you think about what we need to do to get to where we want to go, and those much smarter than I will, explain what that is in a few minutes. But when we think about that, having that alignment from a policy perspective, from a design, engineering, planning perspective, and from a law enforcement and traffic safety perspective is critical. So, first and foremost, I want to thank you all for being here and just recognize the dedication of, everybody in this room to the cause that we're here, to talk about today. So, again, really appreciate that first and foremost. Give yourselves a hand just for being here. So, want to take a few minutes to thank some people that have really been critical to this effort. First and foremost, County Commissioner Charlie Kenny, who is the chair of our County Transportation Committee, who has at every step of the way led this initiative and made sure that we're focused on Vision Zero and on this event in general, making sure that we're getting and gathering important feedback from leadership in our community. I also want to thank Khalida Antrim, head of our Department of Transportation, and his entire team for the incredible work that they've put in to this. From safety to quality of life to economics, the transportation issues facing every county are as complex as they are varied, and they impact everyone on some level, and our county is no exception. This year's symposium is a chance for us to do a deep dive into one of the most critical transportation issues we currently face, improving safety on our roads. Like so many counties across New Jersey and throughout the United States, we're seeing an increase in both the number of accidents and the number of serious or fatal crashes. It has to stop, and so we've gathered all of you here today to listen, share your input, and help us to refine our game plan to address this issue. We're leaning on you not only because of your knowledge and experience in your respective areas of expertise, but also because we know we cannot improve roadway safety without the help of all the partners who I just mentioned. So again, I thank you for your support. Our focus for today is Vision Zero, and we've got some of the best minds in the industry here, including journalist, author, and East Brunswick native Jessie Singer as our keynote speaker. Very excited to have her and thank her for taking the time. We're excited for the discussions that her keynote and our breakout sessions will inspire, and the ideas and potential solutions that may come from those conversations. With that, vitally important to the leadership of this entire initiative is our County Commissioner Board, and I want to recognize the leader of our county, County Commissioner Director Ron Rios, to the podium to say a few words.
Thank you, John. Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you all for being here this morning. Middlesex County's convenient location here in central Jersey and the many critical thoroughfares that run throughout our county mean that millions of people travel our roads each year. Our families, our neighbors, and everyone else who travels in or around Middlesex County deserves to arrive safely at their destination. So we're making data-driven investments in infrastructure that helps improve safety on our roads, including implementing new traffic light signals and redesigning critical intersections to help reduce the number of serious accidents. In the future, we'll have even more data to work with as we leverage the information collected by Data City, our autonomous and smart mobility initiative. As a leader in connected and autonomous vehicle technology development, we're working hard to identify and implement technology-led safety programs like Vision Zero to help reduce accidents and prevent traffic fatalities. We're opening our Network Operations Center this year, an office under our Department of Transportation, which is chaired by Commissioner Charlie Kenny and led by Department Head Khalid Anjum. The data collected by and processed in our Network Operations Center will be invaluable to our mission. But we know that improving road safety goes beyond infrastructure and technology. It also involves educating drivers and pedestrians on crash prevention. This spring we'll launch a public service announcement campaign to help educate Middlesex County residents that distracted driving is the #1 cause of fatal and serious injury crashes, and that there is something that they can do about it. We all need to do our part, and that includes the public being mindful about how they drive and reporting unsafe driving when they encounter it. On behalf of the entire Board of County Commissioners, I thank you all for making the time to be here today, to share your insights and to learn from one another. It will take all of us working together to improve safety on our roads, and the discussions that will happen during this symposium will help get us closer to achieving that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Director. Next up, again, we have one of the key people who's responsible not just for the county's commitment to Vision Zero, but to today's event, County Commissioner Charlie Kenny.
Like everybody else said, good morning, everybody. Good morning. So I really can't see you because these lights are bright. So I heard some voices, so I know you're out there. But it was very kind words that John Carroll said before about my leadership in this role as far as Vision Zero and the other programs. But I'm sure you can see each other out there. The real leaders and the real people that get this done are the people from the Transportation Department. And so Khalid and the Transportation Department, if you could just stand up and be acknowledged, I just want to say thank you all very much for what you do to make this happen. I'm just a pretty face, so. And also thank you to John Carroll and the Office of Government Public Affairs for what they've done to put this symposium together. You've done a great job. So, thank you all for being here. An event like this doesn't work without your support and active participation. So I'm grateful to all of you for making the time to be part of this. The focus of today's symposium is Vision Zero, and for good reason. Serious and fatal traffic accidents are on the rise, not only here in Middlesex County, but throughout the nation. I know I speak for everyone involved in today's event when I say that we are fortunate to have journalist and author Jesse Singer as our keynote speaker today. I actually had the opportunity to hear Jesse speak a few years back before the NJTPA, and I thought she did a great presentation. Also her book, There Are No Such Things as Accidents. I believe I got the title correct. It's a good book too. Jesse is an expert in harm reduction and injury prevention, and Middlesex County is an early adopter of Vision Zero, which seeks to eliminate traffic fatalities and severe injuries while promoting equitable mobility for all road users. So this is the perfect match. In fact, Middlesex County was the first county in New Jersey to adopt the Vision Zero Action Plan. In 2022, we formed a Vision Zero working group, which I was honored to co-chair alongside my colleagues on the Board of County Commissioners. Deputy Director Santinara, who serves as chair of the county's Department of Public Safety and Health. The end result of the working group was our Vision Zero Action Plan, for which we received a Complete Streets Excellence Award from the New Jersey Department of Transportation. Vision Zero is the strategic initiative of Destination 2040, the county's roadmap for long-term economic success, and we are proud to lead the way in creating safer roads, particularly by using technology and data to understand traffic patterns and driver behavior to help prevent accidents. While using data from our Southern Middlesex County Freight Movement Study, completed in 2023, to help improve safety by reconfiguring roadway lanes and intersections, and limiting truck traffic on our local roads and in local neighborhoods throughout the southern portion of the county. And we're investing in other key infrastructure projects as part of our Vision Zero action plan. For example, in 2024, the County Department of Transportation replaced outdated traffic light systems and installed new, modernized traffic light systems equipped with accessible pedestrian signals at critical intersections at Smith and Goodwin in the city of Perth Amboy, and at Oak Tree Road and Warwick Roads in Edison Township. These projects also included improvements and modifications to curbs and sidewalks to be ADA compliant, as well as corner and roadway reconfigurations to address overall roadway safety. We also installed a new traffic light on Roosevelt Avenue in the borough of Carteret, and most recently began installation of a traffic light signal at the intersection of Finnegan's Lane, County Road 682, and Corey Drive in South Brunswick. In addition to these investments, we also addressed road safety through targeted initiatives like on our Route 1 Safer Travel Initiative. It's no secret that Route 1 is not only a vital thoroughfare in our county, but a dangerous one as well in response to the rise in serious and deadly crashes on this road. Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office, led by Prosecutor Chacon, is partnering with the NJDOT to spearhead a multi-jurisdictional task force that will leverage data to help mitigate and prevent traffic collisions and fatalities. This task force is an all-hands-on-deck initiative that brings together law enforcement from Woodbridge, Edison, New Brunswick, North Brunswick, South Brunswick, and Plainsboro police departments to help create innovative, data-driven solutions that will make Route 1 safer for everyone. A monthly working group consisting of county and state transportation, engineering, and planning agencies, as well as the various police agencies, will evaluate, assess, and pull insights from real-world traffic data on Route 1 to expedite safety-related infrastructure improvements. I can't stress this enough. Middlesex County is committed to making our roadways safer, and we're working together with our partners at the state and municipal levels and in law enforcement to make that happen. So I appreciate you all taking the time to be here today, and I look forward to the productive conversations and ideas that will come out of this morning. So thank you all very much.
All right, thank you once again, Commissioner Kenny. I'd like to take a moment to recognize some of our partners who are here with us and who are such a vital part of this effort. Again, from our County Commissioner Board, County Commissioner Director Ron Rios, County Commissioner Claria Escona-Barber, County Commissioner Charlie Kenny, and our County Clerk Nancy Pinkin. Thank you for being here. At the municipal level, we have Councilwoman Iman El-Badrawi from Cranberry. We have Councilwoman Miriam Cohen from Monroe. We have Mayor Jim Cahill from the City of New Brunswick. Thank you for hosting us within the city. And we have Councilwoman Gabrielle Cahill from Piscataway. Again, thank you to all for being here and for your commitment to this initiative. And from the Middlesex County Improvement Authority, we have our Executive Director, Jim Polos, who works closely with KMM. Thank you. From the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, we have our Commissioner, Kevin McCabe, here. Thank you. And from the New Jersey Department of Transportation, we have Chris Scales, Chief of Staff. Chris, thank you for being here. Finally, to give today's keynote address, I'd like to welcome to the stage the person who, you don't often get to say this, not as a figure of speech, but who literally wrote the book on accidents and why the majority are both predictable and preventable. Journalist Jesse Singer, the author of There Are No Accidents, The Deadly Rise of Injury and Disaster, Who Profits and Who Pays the Price. Jesse?
Good morning, everyone. I'm going a little more high-tech than everyone else. You have to give me a sec to get settled. But, so I give these talks all around the country, and I don't think I've ever felt so excited about one as this one, because I grew up here. I learned to walk, bike, and drive on Middlesex County streets. So as someone who's dedicated her career to traffic safety, it's especially an honor to be here with you all today. Really. So let's get started. I have a question for you all. Did anyone make a mistake today? For example, I forgot my glasses and I had to go back to the hotel. Does anyone want to shout out a mistake they made today? Okay, so this is a trick. I always ask this question, no one ever answers, because we don't like to talk about when we screw up. But that's what we're going to talk about today. We are going to go talk about what happens when human error occurs. And I had to go back to my hotel. Those were pretty basic consequences for forgetting my glasses. But today we're going to talk about mistakes, about screwing up, about human error. But we're going to talk about mistakes that are harder to live with. We're going to talk about mistakes like this. Oh, there we go. Now, I want everyone to pause. Take a moment and check in with yourself. How does it feel for me to call this a mistake? It might make you feel angry. It might feel dismissive or disrespectful to call this a mistake. Like, I should instead be talking about the horrible person that caused this crash. And that feeling is what we're going to learn about today. We're going to learn about how we react to crashes and how those reactions may stand in the way of making streets safe. And that lesson starts with the fact that we don't like to talk about this. We don't like to talk about errors or mistakes, even when they're minor, like my glasses. In fact, so it's much more unpleasant to talk about this. So unpleasant, we have a euphemism for it. We don't call it what it is, a crash or a collision or a fatality. Instead, we call it random. We call it unpredictable. We call it an accident. So today, I'm going to prove to you that that is a lie. That none of this is random or accidental, that there are no accidents. But I'm also going to help you understand why we want to call this an accident, and how, by challenging that way of thinking, you have the power to save lives. And the short answer is this. We call this an accident to avoid acknowledging that we've built a high-risk system that we all need to rely on every day, where even the slightest mistake, even the smallest lapse of attention, could kill you or someone else. And I get it, that is a terrifying thing to consider. But until we challenge our discomfort with errors, until we're willing to examine the dangers built into the system, then we can't have truly safe streets. And that's why we're going to talk about mistakes today. In my research, I've uncovered that the most important thing we can do to prevent injuries and fatalities on our roads hinges on what we do and how we think right after things go wrong. And almost always, right after we learn of a traffic crash, our very first reaction is to ask, who made a mistake? Who screwed up? Whose fault is it? And we almost never ask, what happens next if nothing changes? What will happen next if the street where this crash occurred stays exactly as it is? And what about the hundreds of other streets that look just like it? Because asking who made a mistake is a way of seeing a crash as random, unpredictable, and accidental. It's a way of keeping that crash small and unique and manageable. Weirdly, it's a way of making ourselves feel safe. And today I'm going to help you understand why we think this way and how it stands in the way of our efforts to make streets safe. And also how you can fight for a better way. But I'm getting ahead of myself because to start, I should explain to you how I know all of this and how I came to be standing before you all today and write this book that you've heard about. So I know all this because I'm a person who suffered a horrible loss. And that loss was called an accident. And I know all of this because I'm an investigative journalist by trade. So after that horrible loss, I was determined to understand what we really meant when we said all of these deaths and injuries were just accidents. So I investigated. Let me tell you about what I found out. So on the screen is a photo of me and my best friend, 20 years ago, a year before he was killed in a horrible traffic crash. My best friend's name was Eric Eng. He grew up here in Middlesex County too. He was kind and funny and deeply righteous. He was a math teacher at a New York City high school when he died. And he was just 22 years old. He was struck and killed by a driver while riding his bike. Eric was killed riding his bike on a bike path that runs along the Hudson River in New York City, where we both lived. He was riding uptown on this bike path when he was struck and killed by a man driving downtown. The driver had mistakenly turned and entered the bike path and then driven for more than a mile. The driver was also drunk and speeding 60 miles an hour. Eric died right there on the bike path of massive internal injury. Now, the driver who killed my best friend made obvious errors and bad decisions. He was drunk, he was speeding, he was driving a car on a bicycle path. And for these reasons, he was sent to prison. And for a long time, that appeared to be the end of the story. A drunk driver, an accidental turn, a prison sentence. The end. And so for a long time, while I mourned, I didn't ask further questions. But 11 years later, something would happen that would inspire 1,000 questions. 11 years after my best friend was killed by a man driving downtown on that bike path, a different man rented a truck, and he followed the exact same route. Except, unlike the man who killed my best friend, this man was sober. He intentionally turned onto the bike path. On October 31st, 2017, he drove downtown on that bike path and killed 8 people and severely injured 11 in an act of mass murder. I remember getting the call that morning and being truly shocked that someone had killed so many people in the exact same place, in the exact same way as Eric had been killed. But hearing me say that, you might be thinking, was it the same, Jesse? And you're right, there are a few ways you could look at what happened. Was it history repeating? Or was I seeing a coincidence where there wasn't? In one light, the incident was nothing like Eric's death. Different perpetrators, different intentions, different crimes. But in another light, the incident was identical. Same weapon, same location, same mechanism of harm, same cause of injury-related death. The question of whether history was repeating or I was seeing a coincidence where there was none could be answered by how you saw the problem. Did all these people die because of errors and decisions that these 2 drivers made? Or because the dangerous conditions allowed those decisions to cause harm? If you saw the problem as the former, a matter of errors and decisions, then the deaths were totally unrelated. If you saw the problem as the latter, a matter of dangerous conditions, then the deaths were inextricable. To find out which was which, I started asking questions about my best friend's death, and in particular, the place where he died. And what I found out was that long before the mass murder, other people had been killed by drivers on this same bike path. Just the same way, before and after Eric had been killed. Now, every time the drivers were different. Some were drunk, some were distracted, some were lost. They all made different errors and decisions that led them to end up on this bike path. But they all ended up on this bike path and all killed someone with their cars. And every time the same story was told, it was an accident. And every time city officials found an error to explain away the accident. Someone was drunk, someone was distracted, someone was lost. And having found that error, each incident was considered solved. But after the mass murder, after this intentional act, the story was different. It was no longer a so-called accident. So for the first time, city officials questioned the dangerous conditions built into the design of the bike path. The truth was that the bike path looked identical to the adjacent road. It had a double yellow line running down it, like every road in America. Every entrance was big enough for a car. So after this horrific act of mass murder, the city changed those conditions. No longer would the bike path look identical to the adjacent road. Now, every single entrance would be barricaded. You could still bike onto the path, but you could no longer fit a car through the bollards. Just like that, they made the harm impossible. And they prevented both the mass murder and the so-called accident from ever happening again. For me, it was a stark realization that we individualize problems as a sort of magical thinking. Focusing on human error allows us to disregard preventable harm because it's cheaper and easier and more satisfying to decide that someone made a mistake than to decide that you need to redesign a whole bike path or every street in a city. I learned a hard lesson. I learned that the only way to make streets safe, the only way to make the world safe, was to stop seeking human error and blaming human error, and instead ask what we could do to protect people, what government could do to protect people from their errors and mistakes and bad decisions. And I also learned that this lesson, is a really, really hard one to learn. Let me explain. Think about what happens right after a traffic crash. We almost always ask questions about error. We don't ask these questions because we're malicious. We ask these questions because they are comforting. It is comforting to think that the problem is as simple as one error and not as complex as all of the conditions in our built environment. It's comforting to think it was an accident because otherwise we need to think this could happen to me or my family on this road or the hundreds of others that look just like it. At the core of what we're talking about here is the difference between two words, error and condition. An error is a mistake, and a condition is an environment. For example, to slip is a human error. Water left on the floor is a dangerous condition. To exceed the speed limit is a human error. A wide, straight road that's designed for speed, that's a dangerous condition. To jaywalk is a human error, but a bus stop without a crosswalk is a dangerous condition. I'm talking about the difference between the way people behave and how the conditions that people face affect their behavior. Let's stick with the wet floor example for a sec. You can slip anywhere, right? You can trip and fall whether or not there's water on the floor. But in the dangerous condition of a wet floor, you're more likely to fall. And you're going to fall harder and faster, and you're less likely to be able to stop yourself, and you're more likely to get hurt. The same is true of the wide open road or the bus stop without a crosswalk. A driver can speed on any street, but on a wide, straight road, they're more likely to speed and less likely to be able to stop in time. Jaywalking can happen anywhere, but on a bus stop without a crosswalk, it's far more likely, and thus far more likely to get you killed. The truth is that human behavior, the thing that we're so myopically focused on after a traffic crash, is hard to control and impossible to perfect. But conditions are a factor that we can change, and that gives us the chance to be far more effective. For example, if a floor is wet, would it be more effective to put up a sign that says wet floor or to dry off the floor? If speeding is a problem on a local road, would it be more effective to install a billboard that says don't speed or to narrow the road to make drivers feel unsafe speeding? If people are being killed jaywalking to a bus stop, would it be more effective to have a police officer ticket people after they jaywalk or to install a crosswalk everywhere that there's a bus stop? The conditions on our road either act as a sieve or act as a barrier, exposing people to all the harm of their mistakes or protecting them from their errors. Now, as people concerned with street safety, we often think our work is controlling those arrows, preventing those errors. But it should not be. In fact, controlling those arrows may be impossible. Certainly, at least, controlling those arrows is an endless game of whack-a-mole. Our work, rather, is the integrity of the circle. We define whether the circle acts as a barrier or a sieve, whether errors are harmless or harmful. Now, before I explain how we can strengthen those barriers between people and their mistakes, it's important to understand why we spend so much time trying to control those errors. So first we're going to dig into why we love blame and error so much. So first things first, it is cheaper to blame error and ignore conditions. If we decide that crashes are people problems, then the roads are safe. And changing people, or pretending we can change people, costs far less upfront than changing conditions. For two, the people who investigate crashes rarely have the power to change the whole system. Whether we're talking about police officers or urban planners, when you have limited power, it is easier to find a human error explanation, because then the solution is just assigning blame, and you can handle that yourself. And not need to petition the powerful people above you for a more complicated systemic change. Now, we're going to get back to both those reasons later, but the last and perhaps most important reason we focus so intently on error is that blaming human error is deeply comforting. Finding someone to blame feels great. Might be a hard thing to hear, but it's really true. when we find a human error, we can pretend that a fatal crash was an aberration. And that means that the system that we use every day to travel from place to place is safe and sound. If the problem is people, then the road system is safe. And then we are safe. And our brains are always seeking safety. In fact, we are psychologically and evolutionarily primed to focus on human error when things go wrong. We survived as a species because we are good at seeking out other people's mistakes as a self-corrective measure. Thousands of years ago, in the wilderness, we saw other people's failures and learned to survive. If you noticed that someone was killed by a tiger while napping, you learned to be more cautious about where you took your naps, and your genes lived to tell the tale. Psychologists call this hyper-awareness, especially when it comes to other people's mistakes, the fundamental attribution error. This is the near universal tendency to see your own mistakes as a product of the environment you were in at the time, but to see other people's mistakes as a problem of human error and personal responsibility. So when we screw up, we blame the conditions we faced. But when other people screw up, we blame their character, who they are as people. And this leads to another psychological hang-up we have about error. When we seek and find an error made by someone else, we're able to draw a line in the sand between ourselves and a terrible outcome. And this process of deciding who screwed up is a way of telling a bad person's story. Psychologists call this the just world fallacy. It's a simple and totally false belief that the world is just, that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. It's a way of reasoning backwards. We look at a traffic crash and think, I bet they did something to deserve this. And then we seek out something that someone did wrong. And having found an error, we feel better. Because if you decide that a crash was caused by a person doing something wrong, and that they behaved the way they did, because they're maybe a bad person, then you've also decided that you know better, that you would make better decisions under the same circumstances. So identifying a mistake, finding a human error is a way of convincing yourself, the system is safe, I am safe, it couldn't happen to me. Simply put, our brains love making that red circle. We love finding human error. It is easy and satisfying, and it makes us feel like we know best. But these psychological hang-ups actually stand in the way of safe streets. Because when we find that one error that someone made before a crash, we explain away a million dangerous conditions hiding in plain sight. Now, I want to look at an example of how this works in the real world. Imagine a person is struck while running across a street to catch a bus on a street where there is a bus stop, but there's no traffic light anywhere near the bus stop. If, after the crash, the officials in charge of that street, to comfort themselves, decide that the cause of the crash was that a bad person jaywalked, well, then the bus stop without a traffic light is going to remain unchanged. So this is Route 27 in North Brunswick, 5 miles from here. It's a street where people live and work. It is a bus route with bus stops. It has a large apartment complex right here at this spot. But it's also a street with miles between safe crosswalks. Now, imagine you lived on this street and relied on the bus. From this point, you would need to walk more than 1.5 miles each way to safely cross the street and return to the bus stop. And if the bus was coming and you decided to make a run for it instead and you were hit, you would be blamed for jaywalking. And nothing would be done to change these conditions. Now, I'm going to keep talking about this bus stop because I think it's probably the most telling example I can offer you of why human error is a poor metric for traffic safety. So there are a lot of bus stops along this stretch of Route 27 and very few crosswalks. But there is one crosswalk right near this bus stop. But it's not a crosswalk with a traffic light and a walk signal. It's a mid-block crosswalk without a traffic signal, demarcated with a single non-regulatory warning sign. That sign indicates that pedestrians may be crossing there. Around 20 feet ahead of the crosswalk, there's another very small regulatory sign there on the right, indicating to stop for pedestrians. Now, I'd like you to picture yourself here in North Brunswick. It's dark out, you just got off the bus, you've been working all day and just finished a long commute. You live at the apartment complex across the street from the bus stop. Maybe it's raining. First, let's imagine that you decide to walk the 50 or so feet from the bus stop to this crosswalk, because that seems like what you're supposed to do. Drivers are speeding through the crosswalk. You can't tell if they see you or not, so you wait for a break in the traffic and you make a run for it. Now, if you were hit, driver error would be blamed for failing to see you in the crosswalk and comply with those signs. Now, let's imagine the same story. It's dark, it's raining, you're tired, but this time, let's imagine that you don't walk the 50 feet to the crosswalk. Let's say that this time you stay right next to the bus stop because you make this commute every day and you know it doesn't make much difference if you walk to the crosswalk or not because there's no traffic signal to stop the cars. So you make a run for it, right at the bus stop. Now, if you were hit in this scenario, then pedestrian error would be blamed for jaywalking. This setup exactly is why blame and human error are poor metrics for traffic safety. Because 50 feet and a tiny sign makes all the difference in whose error we would blame. And from that blame, from that decision, we would draw data points. We would make enforcement plans. We would have meetings and decide how best to move forward. And I can tell you, one of those meetings might have happened to discuss this very spot just a few months ago. On October 28th of last year, at 9 p.m., a 24-year-old pedestrian named Jaden Bell was crossing Route 27. He was right around the spot when he was struck by the driver of an SUV and killed. Now, I can't tell you whether Jaden was running across the street here in the crosswalk or here outside the crosswalk. I cannot tell you who made the last error before this tragedy. I don't know. But I can tell you I do not care. Because a bus stop across the street from an apartment complex without a traffic light is a dangerous condition. And in the face of dangerous conditions, blame for human error, whether it's the pedestrian or the driver, is just a distraction. It's a distraction from the conditions in our control. Now, perhaps at this point, I've earned your skepticism. That's why I'm here. Perhaps you're thinking, Jesse, of course we need to focus on stamping out errors. Drivers and cyclists and pedestrians are making dangerous decisions. Of course we can change their behavior. Now, let me prove this wrong definitively because I understand the urge to think this way, how enticing human error explanations are, and how much our culture reinforces them. So first let's start by debunking this idea on ourselves. I can't see you, so this is going to be difficult, but can you raise your hand if you made a New Year's resolution in January this year? I did. Very few self-improvement in this room. Okay, keep your hand away, keep your hands up, keep your hands up. All right, now keep your hand up if you're still keeping that resolution.
That's right.
Yeah, not so good. No offense. Look at that. We couldn't even change our own behavior, and it's only March. And resolutions are behaviors that we want to change. Bad, undesirable behaviors. Not behaviors that benefit us, like driving fast when you're in a rush or jaywalking when the bus is coming. But let's zoom out from our own individual experiences because I want you to leave here today with a deep and diverse stack of examples that debunk the idea that traffic crashes are caused by human error so that you can take them home and repeat them because I know how common the urge to blame is. And I know that if you want to change conditions on local roads, you need to be ready to explain why blame isn't going to help. All right, here's a historical example. Traffic fatalities in the US declined for decades after the first automobile safety standards were passed in the 1970s. But the trend reversed in the 2000s, and fatalities have been rising ever since. Did everyone suddenly become more accident-prone? Of course not. Conditions changed. Our vehicles got larger and heavier, and suburban poverty grew. So more people who couldn't afford a car were living in places without sidewalks and bike lanes. Okay, here's a local example. The rate of traffic fatalities here in New Jersey is higher than it is in New York, where I live. Are y'all worse drivers than New Yorkers? Of course not. You face different conditions. Your state is more dense, you have less public transit, and you have more urban driving. The same story holds if we zoom out. The rate of traffic fatalities in the US is significantly higher than it is in Europe, Korea, or Japan. Do we think Koreans are better at walking and biking than Americans? Do we think Europeans make fewer errors? Of course not. We face different conditions. Now we're going to look closer at Europe. Now there's a million examples like this in Europe, but because I like this quote, we're going to look at Finland. The average driving lane width in Finland is around 2 feet narrower than it is in the US. Now, imagine leaving here today and getting in your car. Imagine if your driving lane was 2 feet less wide. Imagine how that would make you drive differently. I can tell you, you would slow way down because you would be way more crowded on every side and afraid that you would hit the car next to you. The conditions on the road would make you slow down, just like you slow down when a road is covered in potholes. And the result of these different conditions is massively consequential. Just in Finland's case, in the past decade, traffic fatalities in Finland fell by 26%. In the same period, traffic fatalities in the US rose by 29%. Finland designs its roads to reduce the likelihood of a high-speed crash by making drivers feel unsafe speeding. In the US, we design our roads to encourage the likelihood of a high-speed crash by building wide, straight roads that make drivers feel safe speeding. And then we post up billboards telling people to slow down, and we ticket them when they don't. So what is the result of this attraction to blame writ large? I suspect you all know the facts as well as I do, so I'm going to be brief. The situation in the US is dire. Fewer children walk or bike to school every year. Traffic fatalities have been rising for more than a decade. Bike and pedestrian fatalities are rising even faster than traffic fatalities overall. And here in New Jersey, a higher share of your traffic fatalities are pedestrian fatalities than anywhere in America. And because these traffic fatalities are not a matter of error, but conditions on our roads, and we don't all face the same conditions, there are massive economic and racial inequities in who is killed in traffic crashes. Nationwide, people living in the lowest income communities have the highest rate of traffic fatalities. Black, Indigenous, and Latino people are dramatically more likely to be killed in all types of traffic crashes. And here in New Jersey, Black and Latino people are killed in crashes at a significantly higher rate than white people. And let's be clear, Black and Latino people are not uniquely drawn to jaywalking. People living in low-income communities are not especially accident-prone drivers. These groups are exposed to more dangerous conditions. So how does this work? How do conditions affect safety? If we subtract blame for errors and mistakes, it's actually a simple equation. The likelihood of death on any given road is directly defined by the design of the road. For example, pedestrians are statistically more likely to be killed on wide streets with high speed limits and limited lighting without sidewalks and crosswalks. And look at these two roads to see what I'm talking about. Without knowing the speed limit or any of the rules about these roads, on which of these roads would you naturally drive faster? If you were crossing the street, even if you were jaywalking, on which road do you think you're less likely to be hit? These illustrations are so important because here you can really see, when we set aside blame and error, it is abundantly clear, just looking at a street, which conditions keep us safe and which put us at risk. Thinking back to that North Brunswick intersection where Jaden Bell was killed, if we're focusing on controlling error, there's not too much we can do here. But if our job is to protect people from errors, we can do so much. We can do any of this. We can do all of this. And these are just the most obvious answers I can discern from a photograph. We often ask people to be on their best behavior, no matter the conditions they're facing. I want to ask you all, instead, to make it your work to assume that everyone will be on their worst behavior. And decide that it is your job to protect people, even people making the worst decisions. The best explanation I've ever heard from this comes from the epidemiologist, Dr. Susan Baker. Dr. Baker invented the injury severity score that's still used for ER triage today. She popularized the child car seat. And when I asked her to sum up the collected knowledge of her career, Dr. Baker gave me her somewhat controversial safety ethos. To make the road safe, she said, make the road safe for drunks. The bottom line is if you make the world safe for drunks, you make it safe for everybody. Our streets are safe if a drunk person can navigate them. Dr. Baker's role in popularizing the child car seat is a prime example of this ethos. Because children's car seats don't prevent people from driving badly or driving drunk. Rather, car seats prevent the harm of people's mistakes, especially when they're imperfect. We have a choice. We can make streets safe for everyone, for drunks, for jaywalkers, for people who make mistakes. Or we can leave those streets safe for no one but the perfect road user. And I don't know about you, but I'm not sure that person exists. And I say this as someone whose best friend was killed by a drunk driver. Even fatal drunk driving crashes can be a matter of conditions. For example, in 1999, Washington, D.C. extended the operating hours of its metro to keep running past when bars closed for the night. As a result, near metro stations, fatal drunk driving crashes fell 70%. Stopping drunk driving was as simple as changing conditions. In this case, the condition was providing access to public transit service as long as the bars were open. Now, there may not be a metro here in Middlesex County, but these ideas are replicable everywhere. And as we wrap up, I'd like to show you the practical application. We're going to look at this from a few different scales. On one street in New York City, across the whole city of Hoboken, and across the entirety of Sweden. But in every place, it's the same ethos being employed, the same question being asked. What happens when we stop trying to force compliance with the rules and instead try to reduce the harm of people's mistakes? Let's start with the smallest scale, one street. This is Prospect Park West, a street in New York City. So Prospect Park West used to be known for crashes and for two human error problems. Cyclists rode on the sidewalk and drivers exceeded the speed limit. The majority of drivers exceeded the speed limit, and about half of cyclists rode on the sidewalk. And for years, the city of New York took a human error approach to these problems. They targeted speeding and sidewalk cycling with enforcement and education. In those years, the street looked like the image on the left. The problems remained, and so did high crash rates. Then, in 2010, the city changed the conditions. They narrowed the street and installed a protected bike lane. It's the image on the right. Immediately, speeding and cycling on the sidewalk declined dramatically. The number of cyclists using the route tripled. Injurious crashes fell by 63%. When conditions were changed, most of the human error evaporated into thin air. All right, let's zoom out a bit and look at a citywide scale. This is Hoboken, the first U.S. city to achieve Vision Zero. And while traffic fatalities rose across the U.S., Hoboken reduced pedestrian crashes by 35% in a single year. No one's been killed in traffic in the city in 7 years and counting, but it might be 8 now. One tool that Hoboken used to achieve this was daylighting with curb extensions. So this replaces the parking spaces closest to a crosswalk with islands that reduce crossing time for pedestrians and increase visibility for drivers. And Hoboken implemented this at almost every intersection in the city. So not just where crashes have occurred, not just at known hotspots, but at every potential hotspot. They did this by making road redesign part of everyday repaving and pothole filling. So whenever a street was due for repaving, the street's crash likelihood is considered. And then with repaving comes daylighting and curb extensions, but also narrower driving lanes, wider sidewalks, new medians, raised crosswalks, bus lanes, and bike lanes. This is a way to make safe streets part of the bread and butter, everyday business of government. All right, we're going to zoom out one more time now and look at how leadership from the very top, from people just like you all, can help enact these ideas even on a nationwide scale. That is what these illustrations are about. So these illustrations were commissioned in the 1990s by the government of Sweden. This was at the start of Vision Zero. And the goal was to illustrate how we set up our streets and sidewalks with the narrowest path for safety and with devastating consequences for imperfection. We hear a lot about Vision Zero and the goal of 0 deaths, but in Sweden in the 90s, at the start of Vision Zero, far more important than the goal of 0 deaths was a shift in thinking about road safety. This shift in thinking was known as the safe systems approach. So in Sweden, the old way to design roads was to balance safety, efficiency, and cost. It was important that no one died, but it was equally important that no one was late to work and that none of it cost too much. I imagine this is still the expectation in New Jersey. It certainly is where I live in New York. In fact, it's the expectation of most systems that we call safe, that safety is not paramount, but balanced with efficiency and cost. Sweden gave up the illusion that you can have multiple priorities. They threw out the old desire to balance safety, cost, and efficiency in favor of safety as a singular priority. And they did this by shifting the seat of responsibility. the country decided that government officials in charge of the roads should be more responsible for safe outcomes than individual users of these roads. So when someone died or was injured on the road, the most powerful people were responsible for explaining how they let it happen. Beginning that day, instead of designing for a perfect person, those officials began by asking, what might go wrong here? And building to reduce the harm of inevitable mistakes. And in 2 decades, as traffic volumes grew, Sweden cut the number of people killed on the roads by half. Today, the per capita rate of traffic fatalities in Sweden is less than 1/3 of what it is in the US. Now, so we've been talking about Sweden, but these ideas are not foreign to the US. They're actually only foreign to transportation in the US. For example, this is the hierarchy of controls, which anyone who's worked in workplace safety might recognize. So this is a tool used by OSHA to make workplaces safe. And it is also pretty much Sweden's safe systems approach exactly. The purpose of this tool is to choose the best way to protect people from a dangerous condition. The hierarchy is ranked about its efficacy. So based on the amount of effort required to effectively protect the largest portion of the population. For example, imagine there is a machine in a factory that is giving off toxic fumes. It would take far more effort and be far less effective to outfit every worker with PPE, say a respirator, and then check that every worker is wearing their respirator every day. And it would take far less effort and be far more effective to remove or replace the dangerous machine. And I think it's important to note here, if we apply this hierarchy to the standard tasks of traffic safety, enforcement, education, and engineering, we're working almost exclusively with the least effective interventions. Recently, a researcher at the CDC attempted to apply these same ideas to traffic, and what, according to the data, we know saves lives. I want to be very clear to the traffic engineers and law enforcement professionals here today about what this shows. This shows that you have been given an impossible job. You have been handed a Band-Aid and told to stop a nuclear meltdown because you are told that it is your job to use engineering to isolate people from the hazards of traffic and to use enforcement to change the way that people walk and drive. But you have no power to remove or replace those hazards. You're told it's your job to keep people safe. And you're also told you cannot slow down traffic, though, and you cannot spend too much money, and you cannot make safety any more important than people getting to work on time. That's an impossible job. Because there's no PPE, there's no billboard or PSA that can make this safe. There's no administrative control, no single police officer that can keep people safe here. And there's no way to isolate people from this many hazards without holistically changing the system. But, just because you've been given an impossible job does not mean that you cannot save lives. But let's be clear. Saving lives will require working smarter, not harder. It will require asking why we are being used. It will require asking why we are trying to use a Band-Aid to stop a nuclear meltdown instead of turning down the heat. It will require looking to the most powerful people in your organization and asking them to change how you work. The people in this room are the only ones who can do this. Your work is so important in this crisis because you are the eyes on these streets. You see the data, you experience the dangers on the beat, you know where safety is falling short, and you are the only ones who see the near misses that should sound the alarm of a disaster laying in wait. Starting tomorrow, starting today, you can fight to protect people from their mistakes and from everyone else's. And this is why it's so important that your work is laser focused on the conditions people face and not people's behavior. What I'm talking about is the difference between putting up a sign that says bike lane and putting up a cement curve to protect the bike lane. The difference between a do not enter sign and a row of steel bollards. When you learn of a crash, I want you to set aside everyone's mistakes. And I want you to instead ask, how can I protect people from the harm of these errors? When you see a driver on the road choose to make a dangerous maneuver, I want you to ask, why did that driver make that decision? How can I protect people from that decision? How can I make it easier for that driver to make safer decisions next time? And from these questions, you can start to build truly safe streets. Now, we could call those safe system streets. We could call them streets for drunks, but I like to call them all of the above streets. If I leave you with anything today, I hope it will be the belief that these all of the above streets should be your goal. Streets that are accessible for drivers and people running to catch the bus. Streets that protect even distracted drivers from causing harm. Streets that feel safe enough for a kid to walk home from school and for a person to ride their bike home from their job at 3 a.m. Streets that are as safe for an 8-year-old as an 80-year-old. And now, I know as well as you do, big change is complicated. So often where we end up is somewhere between these two streets. We end up with some of the above streets. We end up with bike routes made up of unprotected, painted bike lanes and job centers that you can only really reach by car. We end up with sidewalks that terminate at the edge of wealthy communities and bus stops without crosswalks surrounding the apartment complexes. And these, some of the above streets, these products of compromise and competing priorities, leave us all in harm's way. When our streets don't work for everyone, then everyone's survival is at the whim of everyone else's ability to never make a mistake. So this is your homework. You have to keep fighting the urge to blame, and you have to train your focus on the conditions that put people at risk. You have to fight for streets where people can make mistakes, can make every mistake I mentioned in the past 40 minutes, all of the above mistakes, and survive and thrive and not cause anyone else harm. As you go home from today's gathering, ask yourself as you travel the streets, who gets to feel safe here? Your work isn't done until the answer is all of the above. Thank you very much. My name is Jessie Singer. I'm an author of a book called There Are No Accidents, and it was a delight to speak with you all today.
Jessie, thank you once again. That was, I'm sure it causes all of us to stop and think, and many, if not all of us, I'm sure have personal experiences that we're thinking of as we go through a presentation like that. So really, thank you once again. That was wonderful. How about another round of applause for Jessie? All right, so at this time, we're going to be breaking out into some different breakout groups. So we have 3 sessions which will be taking place upstairs, and I'll run through all those here. So we are going to have a Vision Zero focused breakout session for law enforcement in rehearsal room 2. Our staff will direct you upstairs. We will have a policy working group for elected officials, business administrators, chiefs of staff, policymakers, mayors up and down the spectrum. And we will have a breakout for really our licensed professionals, right? Engineers, planners, traffic safety committee members, to discuss infrastructure planning and improvement. So I encourage everyone in those groups to please join a great breakout session. It'll be a great opportunity for you to make connections, share ideas, learn from one another, and for us at the county to learn more directly from each of you the things that we can be doing and how we can work together. And again, a round of applause for everyone. Thank you so much for being here today.